Welcome to Dark Loops. Why is this so good? A podcast in which scholarly, creative, over-the-top fans get together to discuss something they find in pop culture that makes them drive to the knees and ask the question, why is this so good? I'm your host, Dr. Scott Jordan, aka Zombie Scotty, cognitive psychologist from Illinois State University. And tonight we discuss the amazing anime series, Mushi-Shi. Joining me in tonight's discussion are some amazing Mushi-Shi fans, anime aficionados, and all-around fantastic people. Please introduce yourselves and tell us, what is your favorite Mushi-Shi memory? And we will start with Tatsu.
Hey, Tatsu Shigeta. I'm a PhD student as well as a customer success rep at a tech company. My favorite Mushi-Shi memory, which Mushi-Shi was one of the first kind of, in my mind, one of the first kind of popular animes, dubbed animes that came out on streaming platforms. So before kind of streaming was the mainstream thing, back when it was just kind of Netflix. It was one of the first anime that was released on Netflix. So I would watch it with my roommate Ben, who you've met, Scott, the excellent drummer.
Oh yeah, fantastic, cool.
Yeah, we lived together senior year in college, and I just recall we had a 4-bedroom apartment, and we had set up one of the rooms as our TV room, and we had this giant TV mounted up on the wall with a futon on the other side of this tiny room. And we would just be glued to the TV watching that. And to this day, he actually texted me out of the blue a week or two ago. And he was like, dude, Mushi-Shi just became available on Hulu. Exactly. And that song starts playing and it just brings me right back. I'm like, yeah, it just never leaves you, you know?
No.
Yeah, I love that. I love that theme song, but anyways, that's my memory.
Yeah, that theme song is actually one of my favorite memories, so I'll wait till I talk about that. But let's go on to Rio.
Sure. Hello, I am Rio Shigeta. I am Tatsu's older, more seasoned brother, and I'm an actor at large, now in Chicago and insufferable anime nerd. So my favorite Mushi-Shi memory, I feel like I've kind of come and gone with this series in a very similar way to Ginkgo. You know, I've left for a year and now I've come back to check on how things are. So I recently did a big rewatch of the first passage of Mushi-Shi, and I did that with a friend, and I think this time I did it correctly. This is not a show to be binged. This is something to experience, to absorb, and discuss. And so my excellent friend Raker did me the honor of watching all of the episodes with me for this season. Wow. And we just had some excellent discussions on each of the episodes. They're all so good in such unique ways. And so I'll say that of the many watches I have done, this one was probably the best.
No, that's fantastic. So I probably watched it the same time Tatsu was watching it with his friend senior year in college, and I love anime. I love the stories. And then I see this one that starts off with a song that sounds like a 70s hipper stoner tune, right? And it's like, everybody just kind of get memorized and chill out, because you are about to be told an incredibly well-paced Japanese folk ghost story. And every one of them was just haunting, even if it's just letters that turn into mushi or something along those lines. And, you know, what I love about anime is it uses different frame rates to accentuate psychological points. And this show just did it masterfully in a way that took that same style, but applied it to a different form of storytelling. And I remember I watched it by myself, you know, when the kids were, and I'd try to talk, hey, watch Mushi-Shi. And then dad's in the TV room and they'd hear that music. Oh, dad's watching Mushi-Shi again, right? But it came out on Hulu, like you said, Tatsu. So I started watching it again, and just get hooked. It's just 20, 30 minutes of, oh my God, and so I love the series. I'm glad you two have seen it. I'm glad we get to talk about it. So what we're going to do here is each of us has picked our favorite Mushi-Shi tale. So we're going to take a little time to tell you our tale, and then the three of us will discuss it and we'll go from there. So we're going to start with Tatsu. Tatsu, what is your favorite Mushi-Shi tale?
Yeah, so I mean, it's hard to choose a favorite because I think that they're all good in different ways, and I think that it's also a series that I've started so many times. So I think I know the first few episodes very well, so it'd be easy to fall back on that. But I think that it's important to also highlight what this story does very well, other than just like storytelling in general, is they're very good about telling you about the world and what Mushi are, and like how it works into a story in a way that's not just kind of like some sort of like ABC, like I need to give you the instructions. It's just kind of worked in nicely. And so one of those episodes was Ginkgo's origin story. Where does Ginkgo come from? Because he's a very mysterious guy. He doesn't talk about himself a lot at all. And so we, obviously we want to know who Ginkgo is. And so my episode or story that I'm going to tell is One-Eyed Fish, the origin story. And the episode starts out with Nuis, who is a white-haired, green-eyed woman, much like the Ginkgo we've come to know. And she's not a particularly warm person, but she finds this kid Yoki, who's passed out, injured, and we come to find this child has the ability to see Mushi, as some people do, and he's afraid of them. And we also find that he was caught in a landslide where his mother was also killed. So here's a kid that has just experienced a lot of trauma, and can also see and is afraid of Mushi, and so he's got a lot of things going on. So maybe it makes sense that he finds this not particularly warm person, but he's just looking for somebody. So Nui takes him back to her place. She lives in a little kind of mountain cottage right next to a pond, and Yoki, as he's healing, goes out to this pond, looks in, and he sees a lot of whitefish. Each of the whitefish have a missing eye and one green eye, just like Nui. And so he's fascinated by it. And he asks Nui about it, and Nui says that, this is due to the Mushi that live around the pond. So those things that you've been seeing, they're called Mushi. And these particular Mushi affect the fish in such a way that turns them white and gives them a missing eye. So, Yoki's very curious. Nui explains that Mushi are very much alive, just not quite like humans. They exist on a completely different plane. And she says, think of them as the essence of life in its many forms. So she explains that the Mushi in the pond are called Tokoyami, who are the darkness. And actually, pretty much translated directly in Japanese, Yami is dark. So Tokoyami are the darkness. So the Tokoyami, they sleep during the day. They come out at night to feed on other Mushi. And at dawn, the remains of these ingested Mushi dissolving in the water that makes the water sparkle silver, these Mushi come out. So it's this silver light that, if you have repeated exposure to it, that's what results in that transformation with the white hair and the missing eye. So Nui says that at the time she doesn't know if these ingested mushi have a name, so she calls them ginkgo, which literally means silver children, if you will. So ginkgo, that's where ginkgo comes from. And so we learned that Nui can actually she has the green eye, and she can actually see in the darkness because of this ginkgo eye that she has. So we come to learn that, not only are you affected in a way that you lose your eye, but you also kind of have mushi-like powers in a way, because of the ginkgo. So we also kind of get to a point where, Nui starts to tell Yoki about, how you should be dealing with this mushi, or these mushi. And, she warned Yoki that, when you're walking in the dark, inevitably you'll walk into places where the moonlight doesn't reach, where the Tokoyami dwell. And if it ever feels like your memories are slipping away, if you have trouble recalling your name or past, you can escape it and not get completely, sucked in if you remember one thing. And so this is very important for later on. But, we then kind of go into Nui's backstory, who, Nui lived in this village that's not too far away from where she lives. And we found out, of course, that, she could see mushi from a young age. And it got to a point where she was attracting so much mushi, and we know that's not very good. So that's why she became a mushi master, and she had to leave her family, her husband, her son behind to become this mushi master. And one time when she came home, the villagers said that sadly her family, her husband, her son, and others had gone into the mountain and they hadn't come back. So of course Nui goes to look for them and finds this pond. So she doesn't find them, but she finds this pond where the Tokiyami dwell. And so, clearly she knows that there's something going on there, and maybe, that's where she needs to be in order to, if there's any chance of her finding her family, right? So we learn that's why she is living where she's living. But she's not super clear about what she's doing. And so Yoki, he's pretty much healed at this point. And of course, as a child who's lost his mother, who has no home, and, he says this is the place that he's lived the longest in his life. And he wants to stay there. He wants to be able to help Nui. But of course, Nui vaguely says, I can't let you stay here because, this is my burden. And I have to do it alone because I don't want you to be consumed by it. And so Yoki, as a child would be, is, not pleased with that answer. That's not good enough for him. So he wakes up at dawn because he wants to go out and look for the Tokoyami to give him his 2 cents. And he goes out to the pond and he starts beating the water with a stick. We know from many stories that you shouldn't disturb the water like that. He finds the Tokoyami. Tokoyami comes swarming in, and he witnesses one of the fish disappearing after it's consumed by the Tokoyami. And so he gets it in that moment. And so Nui comes out and starts explaining that it's actually the light emitted by the ginkgo that turns living things into Tokoyami, right? If you look at the light for too long, you will be consumed and you will become Tokoyami. So we also find that, the reason that Nui's been there for so long is that she's been studying this process on the fish, because, Yoki's mad, like, why didn't you help the fish? And she says, it's not that simple. And I have been trying. I've been studying a way to slow this process as much as I can. But inevitably, as she's studying this, she's also getting exposed to it. So it's a lot like radiation.
Yeah.
The ginkgo, and so that's why her hair turned white, and she lost an eye. And eventually, as she was studying this process, she comes to realize, her family probably turned into Tokoyami. And, that was inevitable. And so, Yoki finds her at this point in her life where she's just about ready to go. But, kind of gets this kind of, final hurrah of warmth from this child. And, she at this point is just like, I've enjoyed our time, but, I need you to leave because I don't want you to suffer my fate. So Nui finally becomes Tokoyami, right? She wakes up in the morning, she just knows it's my time. So she becomes Tokoyami. And Yoki goes looking for her and finds her as a Tokoyami spirit, right? And as soon as he reaches out and touches her, they're in the Tokoyami world. And she's like, "You silly boy, what did you do?" And so as they're going through the darkness, she's trying to lead him back to the light, right? And she explains that she explains that you're going to have to keep one eye closed because you will have to sacrifice one of your eyes for the ginkgo. Right? That's just the way it, and this is like, just as it is with the show and a lot of the episodes, it's brutal. It's like, you're gonna have to give up your eye. There's no other way of doing it, but that's just the way it is. So Ginkgo sees, Yoki sees the ginkgo, which is this eyeless fish that's just swimming in the darkness, and that's kind of when you're hit with, okay, so we're talking about yin and yang, ginkgo and Tokoyami, yin and yang. We'll talk about it more. But anyways, Nui, as they kind of approach the end of their journey through the darkness, Nui leaves Yoki with the parting words that are more or less a creed. You must not let your vision be clouded by fear and anger. There are many times when we must simply accept that all things serve a larger purpose. And then Yoki comes to, but he doesn't remember where or who he is. He's white-haired, he's one-eyed, but the one thing he did remember as his name was Ginkgo. And so he started his life as a nomad because the bottomless pit of his empty left eye was a sign that bad luck would follow him everywhere. And so that was the end of the story.
Snap.
Well done, man. That was fantastic. So reactions?
Yeah, that's such a good episode. It's also an exception in a few ways, I feel like, in that Ginkgo is the protagonist in this episode, which isn't often the case in a lot of the episodes, He'll either come in as sort of a specialist Deus Ex Machina, or he'll just kind of be a bystander, and
Mm.
all of the story just unfolds, and he has to watch as humans inevitably lead themselves to ruin through hubris or what have you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there are many other reasons why this one is so good,
When
but
you go ahead.
yeah. Oh
Well, when
no,
you
I
go ahead.
go
Sorry.
ahead.
Well, when you mentioned the yin yang, holism is a very difficult concept to explain to people, because we're so used to seeing things, objects that don't appear as though they exist in opposition to anything else. That just seem to be what they are. And when you talked about that episode, what I want to ask you guys is, they're writing this for a Japanese audience, I'm assuming. And I'm also feeling that I wonder if that reaction is the same to my American reaction, in the sense that the Tokiyami, the part of the storytelling is to redescribe evil. It's to redescribe what bad is, in the sense that, we like to say you can't get the good without the bad. And it's kind of flipped, but the understanding of the Tokiyami, if I'm saying it correctly, is this is part of what we are. It's part of what reality is. It's not, it's something to sort of accept into how things are, and manage yourself, as opposed to trying to eradicate it, trying to describe it as evil and destroy it. I don't know. I'm just wondering, cross culturally, what is there a vibe I'm missing, or?
Yeah, I think that in Japanese culture, it's not. I think a lot of it kind of comes down to the moral teachings of religion, and I think in Japanese, you really kind of people understand like being good as a balance, right? And I think that really comes through in this. It's not that you have to strive towards these like absolute principles. I think that there's more of an understanding that every person has good and bad forces that live within them, that brings them into being,
Mm.
and that all you can do is find a balance. And I think that part of it is kind of a Shinto belief of spirits kind of dwelling in every crevice of every place. I also think there's some sort of like Buddhist influence in that life is suffering, and therefore all you can do is live.
Yeah.
and yeah,
He wants
so
us to
that's kind of
live.
what comes to mind for me.
Well, sort of along with that, I feel like in Japan, there's definitely a prevalent cultural belief that we are all part of a whole. And
Mhm.
that does also come from Shintoist belief of, being at one in harmony with nature. And it to this day in Japan, the whole takes precedent over the
Mm.
individual
Mm.
in all things. Like being ambitious and self-serving are not necessarily good traits in Japan. You do things sometimes to your detriment to serve
Mm.
the whole, and that is sort of something that sort of duality, or parts being equal and even if opposed, living in harmony. That's definitely something that is sort of deeply ingrained in Japanese culture, in the mind, in the psychology. And while I would say that this is a deeply Japanese series, it's also sort of a book of folk tales for a world that doesn't really exist.
Mm.
So while obviously it was a manga written by a Japanese person for a Japanese audience that was syndicated in a Japanese monthly manga magazine, It's also sort of not for anyone, because we're one step removed from this thing. We are outsiders sort of looking in. And that's a big thing that I think we should discuss later, is sort of the distanciation. The way in which the story is told sort of takes us one step away so that we're not experiencing the emotions of the characters in the story, the drama of it in this sort of, you know, very melodramatic way. We get to observe it as outsiders and sort of contemplate what the situation is, weighing sort of, you know, what is right and wrong, what is life and death, what is our reason for being, and we're able to just sort of sit and absorb that. And like that's something that's done so well in this series, I think.
Yeah, when I talk about the story I'm going to talk about, I think one of the things I wanted to comment on is sort of an example of what you mentioned, and that is the struggle between the Mushi, the main character, and Ginkgo. I actually examined that from all three sides without an overemphasized emotional attachment to the human characters. And a lot of the characters actually look like the characters from the other episodes, right? And I think that's done on purpose. And it is this sort of an attempt to what I call decenter the human condition, and in a way that allows us to examine what is human love, what is human anxiety. And they do such a good job of, I mean, we can only ever experience the Mushi-Shi from Ginkgo's perspective. We never get the Mushi-Shi perspective, right? So I love how they never really cross that fourth wall. They just let us struggle, which is what we have to do anyway. And I absolutely love it. One last thing is, you know, when I watch Miyazaki, one of the reasons I love the storytelling is because this thing I call the inescapability of context, right? There is no place in a Miyazaki story where you can step outside of being, where you can step outside of reality, because everything's written as a whole. And you feel it in the animation, you feel it in the writing. And so Ashitaka cannot escape any consequences. Everything he does matters. Everyone does matters. And it creates these spaces you cannot escape by believing in something bigger than yourself that you'll get to someday that'll be clean of context. I just love when story writers can tell that tale, because it's the one that I think is most coherent, right? And so I love to see how you try to express that to people. And I think this series, it's the most quiet, calm, almost terrifying anime series there is. And the fact that it's so calm and yet so scary, it's just
wholesome horror is what I've heard it described as.
As what?
Yeah. Wholesome horror.
Wholesome horror.
Yeah. I think another thing that, you know, we could maybe talk a little bit more later is that another thing about like Japanese storytelling and you know, the way they kind of like know and understand history in the world is there's always been this kind of like monstrous, like you know, wives' tale sort of storytelling. You know, it's not always a story about like a hero necessarily. Like they love talking about these monsters that, you know, come to be because, you know, because humans have wronged, you know, this person or this, you know, this mountain or the object. And so you know, poltergeist sort of things. As much as there are spirits living everywhere, they're good or bad. It doesn't really it doesn't really matter. So yeah, I mean, I think that this captures the essence of that as well. Is that, you know, Japanese are just enthralled in all supernatural things, and it's also very just kind of like it's just part of the way that you talk about things, right, in everyday life is just kind of like the supernatural is part of the natural. You don't really separate the two. It's not that you believe or don't believe in it. They're there, whether you like it or not. And I think that's what the Mushi are, right? So
maybe
go ahead.
it's also good to contextualize that both Tatsu and I were born in Japan and spent a lot of our early life in Japan, going to school and so on. And so this is stuff that we've sort of lived in and experienced. I just thought that was important to mention. But also, Tatsu, you talked about sort of the difference between Japanese storytelling and traditional sort of hero storytelling that we see a lot of. And in addition to the sort of yokai stories, the cautionary folk tales, there's also a very prevalent style of storytelling where it's sort of the wandering samurai. And the samurai isn't really necessarily the hero of the story, and it's usually a ronin unattached from, a daimyo or duty, but rather it just by nature they're chaotic. Like they have this great strength and a sword that they can wield and the respect of people, but at the same time they're not really pursuing anything, especially in Japanese culture. Like you don't have a life's mission, a purpose. They just sort of go from town to town, and this is a pretty common and often sort of rearranged plot, is that you have a traveling person with a certain ability, and what they do is they just sort of like, they're an agent of chaos. They create situations wherever they go. And if this is sounding familiar, it's because, Ginkgo is the same. Ginkgo has this ability to sort of like draw in Mushi, much to the detriment of those around him. And things just happen around him. And he's capable enough to like fix the situation almost every time. But the story isn't about him and him prevailing over the evil that is Mushi. It's watching and observing the stories each time he goes. I mean, sometimes Ginkgo is the antagonist, and this happens with the samurai stories all the time. The people of the village don't want any of his kind around, and it's all about him trying to make things better, but what turns out to be that the villagers had it just fine all along, something like that. So there's the Eastern way of storytelling in that is that we watch a character sort of exist in a space and how they feel, how they affect their surroundings, and how they're affected by their surroundings, as opposed to a hero coming up against a challenge and prevailing and succeeding. And
I love it.
So.
I gotta tell you what, this is exactly what I've been trying to say about what the MCU is doing, either intentionally or unintentionally. In the sense with the whole Thanos theme, it basically was a humanistic form of holism. In other words, we're all people together and we depend on each other. Kind of eking the audience towards this idea of everything's about everything and nothing's about itself, right? And now in phase 4, they're doing that, or the next phase, they're doing that with time and space. And I think if you can, I don't know if this is their agenda. I just have the sneaking suspicion that it is. So, for example, you mentioned the samurai, you mentioned the idea of the traveling agent of chaos. It's almost as if, Loki in Norse mythology is kind of this character. And what's interesting is that, at least in current American telling of Loki, it's still very agent oriented. It's still very hero, anti-hero, individualist, humanistic stuff. And I just feel we're witnessing an exercise in trying to tell a holistic tale in a 48 movie.
It's usually met with, at best, being ignored, I guess, indifference, this sort of storytelling, because we're just not used to not being constantly bombarded with action and emotion. We I think in the vast amount of entertainment that we are able to consume in this country, we love being surprised, we love being amazed, we love being part of the spectacle.
Guilty.
And yeah, and trust me, I'm the same way, and I could count off a few Mushi-Shi episodes that for that reason I'm like, finally some action,
Yeah.
like Ginko's fighting something.
Exactly.
But
Yeah,
it is a really nice, I think, palate cleanser to come to a show like this and just sort of like get to contemplate, take a second and just like be able to observe and feel things, as opposed to being left at the end of every episode with a cliffhanger that you just have to get to the next one to find out. I think that's cruel.
Yeah.
I think that's like psychologically abusive. And so that might be why Mushi-Shi is rated #1 on a few lists as best anime to fall asleep to, because you can just sort of like at the end of the night sit and reflect.
Yeah.
And go to bed.
That's fantastic.